For much of the second millennium, there existed the Holy Roman Empire. It was once said by the French philosopher Voltaire that the Holy Roman Empire was in no way holy, nor Roman, nor an empire.
So what the f was it?
Shortened to the HRE, the empire was a special and unique polity in Central Europe that dominated the region throughout the early Middle Ages. Notice how I said polity rather than nation or country. So if this Holy Roman Empire wasn't anything it claimed to be, what on earth was it? Well, for that, we must look at the history first. Our story starts with the kingdom of the Franks. The Franks were a Germanic group that inhabited much of Germany, France, and in between after the fall of Western Rome. Within this kingdom, a new dynasty, the Carolingians, came about to rule, starting with a man named Charles Martel, from whom the name derives. His son was a man named Pepin, who would keep close relations with the Pope in Rome, and this friendship would continue down to his son, Charlemagne. His name means Charles the Great, and for a very good reason. He expanded his Rome most eastward and eventually defeated the Lombards, which were hostile to the Pope. Due to this, on Christmas Day 800, Pope Leo III crowned him as the Roman Emperor, a title which was vacant in the eyes of the Pope. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly do I mean by "in the eyes of the Pope"? Until now, the Roman Emperor was usually recognized as the Byzantine Emperor, otherwise known as the Eastern Roman Empire. However, in 797, Emperor Constantine VI was overthrown by his own mother, who now crowned herself Empress Irene, which was a problem to the West as they believed a woman could not be the Roman Emperor. But this is diverging from our story and is a topic for another time. Back in the Frankish kingdom, now the Carolingian Empire, the title had been passed down to his son, and then his grandson, and then a civil war based on succession, resulting in a series of treaties that would split the empire into creatively named West Francia, which would eventually become France, Middle Francia, and East Francia. Our story will stick with the eastern portion. Around the year 900, various stem duchies arose in East Francia, such as Franconia, Bavaria, Swabia, Saxony, and Lotharingia. After Louis the Child died in 911, instead of the throne passing down normally, it instead decided that the nobility should elect one of the dukes, the one of Franconia, as the new king. This would not only start the HRE's infamy of disunity, but also its elective monarchy. We shall skip to the year 951, where King Otto of East Francia had defeated the Magyars, later to be known as the Hungarians, and took control of Italy. Soon, in 962, Pope John XII would crown Otto the Roman Emperor in return, since the Hungarians had not become Christian yet, and therefore Otto had saved Christendom. This was a title which had been sort of extinct since the dismantling of the Carolingian Empire. Otto would then go on to appoint two different popes with his apparent newfound authority, which would be a part of the long rivalry between the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire. By now, the Holy Roman Empire contained several kingdoms, such as that of Germany, Italy, and more, with a few more other autonomous lands such as the Marches set on the border to protect the empire, and other noble-owned lands. During the 12th century, a mass migration event known as Ostsiedlung happened where Germans migrated to the northeastern regions such as Pomerania, Silesia, and Prussia, following Christian crusades by the Teutonic Order, making them German majority. Some of these areas would go on to join the empire. In 1137, Lothair III, Duke of Saxony and Emperor, died, and the nobles elected Conrad III of the Hohenstaufen family from the Duchy of Franconia, much to the hatred of the powerful Henry the Proud of the House of Welf. This led to a century of fighting between the two dynasties, which was ended by Frederick Barbarossa von Hohenstaufen. This started an era of domination by the Hohenstaufens. Soon, Frederick would add the major kingdom of Sicily to the empire, which threatened the Pope. The two engaged in war, but since Frederick mainly focused south and spent much of his time fighting in Italy, the northern German states would eventually gain more and more autonomy, which would continue the Holy Roman Empire down the path of massive decentralization. Soon, an interregnum happened where the empire was left without an emperor for just over 20 years, where afterwards, Rudolf I von Habsburg, who had recently fought to gain the duchies of Austria and Styria from the Bohemians, was elected emperor. He was the first to come of the Habsburgs on the Holy Roman throne. However, he was never crowned the emperor. Also in the 12th century, a new regional power, the Hanseatic League, was established. This was a trading league and alliance of merchant towns across the Baltic Sea and the North Sea, including famous cities such as Lübeck, Hamburg, Bremen, and more. These cities would eventually become free imperial cities, a new form of government where important cities in the empire would become republics and be free from larger powers. The Hansa would go on to incredibly influence and shape North German international affairs. So, do you remember the nobles I kept on mentioning that elected the emperor? Well, up until now, they were not set in stone, and we don't even know for sure who was an elector. This was until the Golden Bull of 1356, issued by the Imperial Diet at Nuremberg and Metz, which I will get onto what this is later, which would set in stone the electors of the Holy Roman Empire. Previously, the emperor needed every noble to vote for him. Now, he only needed a majority. Furthermore, the title of the elector was now hereditary, meaning it did not change every time a leader dies, but would instead pass on to their successors. These electors would include 3 spiritual electors, which would be the archbishops of Mainz, Trier, and Köln, and the 4 secular electors, which would be the King of Bohemia, the Count Palatine of the Rhine, the Duke of Saxony, and the Margrave of Brandenburg. These would change as borders and situations would change, but for now, it would stay the same. This mostly angered the 2 of the most powerful families in the empire, the Habsburgs and the Wittelsbachs. The Habsburgs were angry because their powerful lands in Austria did not get the electorship, and the Wittelsbachs were angry because they were divided between the Palatinate and Bavaria, which had only itself recently unified, and the Bavarian branch of the family claimed that Bavaria, which had been around and dominated for much longer since the early days of the empire, deserved the electorship. It was suggested that the title switch between the 2 each time, but this never happened. The only powerful family that was not mad was the House of Luxembourg, who ruled Bohemia at this time. We will leave the history at that. Even though there is much more to talk about, I feel that the only topics that must be touched upon past 1356 now should be the Peace of Augsburg in 1555, which gave princes in the empire either the decision to be Catholic or Lutheran, a branch of Protestantism, and the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, which added Calvinists to the options, acknowledged the independence of the Swiss Confederacy, now known as Switzerland, gave a few territorial changes, and solidified the sort of independence of the various states within. This was a major blow to the emperor, who now lost even more control. This history was incredibly oversimplified, but now it is time for even more oversimplification as I describe the power structure. The empire had no proper constitutions or actual laws in place for all of this, it just became a tradition. So I will explain how it generally was. The legislative body, which was sort of like a parliament or senate, was called the Imperial Diet, or the Reichstag in German. It was divided into 3 colleges or groups. The first was known as the College of Electors, which consisted of all the electors mentioned before. They would vote not for the emperor, but instead another title known as the King of the Romans. After election, the King of the Romans would not officially become the Holy Roman Emperor until coronated by the Pope. However, once the Pope stopped doing that, some emperors styled themselves as Emperor-elect instead. The second group was the College of Princes. Different areas of land in the Holy Roman Empire were ruled by dukes, counts, bishops, barons, princes, lords, abbots, margraves, and other feudal titles. However, they were all collectively referred to as princes or imperial princes. There were about 300 of these titles at once at some periods of the empire's lifetime. However, they could be divided into 2 benches. The first was for secular rulers who did not rule by religion, and the second was for the Hochstifte, also known as the ecclesiastical rulers, who ruled by religion, such as bishops, archbishops, and abbots. The third was the College of Imperial Cities. This consisted of cities around the empire who were republics, though usually oligarchical, who held a special status known as imperial immediacy, which meant that their direct overlord was the emperor, no in-betweens. The benefit of this being that they were only subject to the emperor's taxes and demands, and they also held a higher negotiating position against most other imperial princes. The Hochstifte and a few other exceptions, such as the imperial knights, were also granted this status. However, if I continue talking about the Holy Roman Empire and all of the convoluted mess that it created, then this video would go on forever, and even then I won't be able to fully describe the empire to the extent that it deserves, and therefore we must stop the explaining there. I would, however, like to quickly talk about what eventually happened with the Holy Roman Empire and how it eventually fell. By the time the 18th century rolled in, views on the empire were not universally positive, with the widespread idea that the Holy Roman Empire was quote-unquote sick. Despite this widespread idea, the empire wasn't quite at its gradual decline. And then the French Revolution happened. And this stemmed both the Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars, of which the Holy Roman Empire became involved in. This later became a catastrophic decision, as in 1804, Napoleon crowned himself as Emperor of the French, which drew a mixed reaction from the Holy Roman Empire. As a response, Holy Roman Emperor Francis II proclaimed himself as Emperor of Austria under the title of Francis I, a move done to maintain equality between both Austria and France, and to clarify that the Holy Roman Empire was more powerful than both. Despite this, Austria lost the Battle of Austerlitz in December of 1805, and in July of 1806, several of Francis II's German vassals broke away from the empire to form the Confederation of the Rhine, a French satellite state. 1 month later, on August 6, 1806, Francis II abdicated his title, effectively dissolving the Holy Roman Empire, a move seen as necessary to prevent any possibility of Napoleon crowning himself as the emperor. The Confederation of the Rhine, however, only lasted 7 years, being dissolved on November 4, 1813, following the French defeat at the Battle of Leipzig roughly 3 weeks earlier. As this video draws to its close, I would like to take this time to acknowledge and give a special thanks to my Discord friend IDK What My Name Is, who wrote the majority of today's video's script. This video wouldn't have been possible without you, man. I would also like to acknowledge and thank all of those whose Creative Commons images were used in this video, as there sure were a lot of you. That's all for today, and I hope you enjoyed today's exploration.